Okay, I think are good to go. We're good to go. Okay, great. So hi everyone. My name is Leslie Soble. I manage the Food and Prison Project at Impact Justice. If you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat, we've got some friendly faces on here as well as some folks that we don't know. So please go ahead and share with us who you are, where you're calling in from today. I will be leading this session, but I also have a wonderful group of colleagues with me, including Krista Okerholm, who is the Director of Culinary and Food Sustainability at the Maine Department of Corrections, Chris, who leads the garden crew at the Maine State Prison. They are both calling in today from the Maine State Prison. Mark McBride, who manages food service at Mountain View Correctional Facility and Down East Correctional Facility. Mark, where are you calling in from today?
I'm at Maine Correctional Center.
Oh, okay, you're down at MCC today. Okay, great. And Mark is also the star of a new documentary film, which you'll have the opportunity to see later. We also have program chef Colin Freeman of Brigade. Colin, where are you calling in from today?
Calling from Mark's home. I'm in Mountain View.
Oh, okay, you're up at Mountain View. You two have switched spots from the usual.
Yep.
And also our Food and Prison Project Program Associate, Haile Ganthan, who is joining us from Southern California and will be helping with tech and monitoring the chat today. And I am actually zooming in from St. Louis, Missouri, where I am currently attending the Refed Food Waste Solution Summit, trying to get the issue of the immense amount of food waste that is generated by carceral facilities onto the agenda of people who are active in the food waste movement. And please excuse the unattractive hotel room decor behind me, not my usual Zoom spot. But to go over our agenda for this session on food justice and Maine's carceral systems, we'll start off. I'm going to give an overview of the topic and why we're talking about this. And then you will get to hear from a wonderful panel of folks who are working on the ground to transform the prison food experience within the Maine Department of Corrections. We'll leave some time for you all to ask questions of the panelists and then together spend some time brainstorming ways that you and other folks who are working in Maine's food system can support the nourishment of community members who are impacted or have been impacted by incarceration. Please feel free to leave questions in the chat at any time. We'll try and keep an eye out there. And we can go ahead and start with our overview. So slide, please, Hyla. Thank you. So why are we talking about prison food at the Maine Food Convergence? Most people don't really stop to think about situating prisons or also jails in the context of food systems. These are spaces that have been intentionally designed to sit apart from communities, and we've all been taught to think of them as separate from our communities, but that doesn't mean that they actually are. They're not separate when it comes to human beings, and they're definitely not separate when it comes to food. And there's so much excellent work being done in the food justice space, especially in Maine, to make sure that everyone really does have access to nourishing food. But too often people who are incarcerated or who have been incarcerated are left out of that work and left out of those conversations, not just as consumers of food who also need and deserve access to good, nourishing food, but also as potential leaders and drivers of change in that movement. And I also want to mention the issue that food inside of prisons and jails is inherently linked to food access and nutrition security on the outside as well. So this is not just in Maine, but anywhere around the country. People who are at the highest risk of food insecurity and nutrition insecurity are often those who are coming from communities with higher rates of incarceration. And then they enter institutions where there are often replications of those patterns of food insecurity and nutrition insecurity. And then upon release, people who have been incarcerated often face even greater challenges in maintaining access to nourishing food, which can perpetuate serious health impacts that then can ripple out to families and communities. So this really is a major health equity issue. Slide, please, Hyla. So to zoom out a bit and just sort of place this in a national context, Impact Justice's Food and Prison Project began in 2018 as an effort to call attention to the crisis of food in US prisons and jails. And this is really an issue that affects the country on a grand scale. There are about 2 million people who are currently incarcerated in the US in prisons, jails, juvenile detention centers, and other facilities of confinement. Over 10 million people enter local jails each year alone. And even if this issue doesn't directly impact you, then you probably know someone for whom it does. 1 in 3 adults in the US has an immediate family member who has spent time in prison or jail. So it's something that is really stigmatized, but it really does impact a significant portion of the population in this country. And the purpose of our work at the Food in Prison Project is really to amplify the voices of those who are most impacted, to connect people who are working on this issue across geographic borders, across different sectors, and to bring more folks into dialogue about how the standard approach to prison food in this country really only serves to perpetuate harm. In 2020, we published a report called Eating Behind Bars, Ending the Hidden Punishment of Food in Prison. You can see the link there on the slide. We can also share it again in the chat later. And it was based on 1.5 years of really intensive research into the state of prison food in the US, and featured a lot of research from surveys and interviews with formerly incarcerated folks, site visits from prisons around the country, talking with different corrections staff, experts in nutrition, all kinds of folks. And in that report, we described the abysmal state of prison food, its short and long-term impacts on not just incarcerated individuals, but also their families, communities, the environment. And we really name prisons as sites of food apartheid and explain why the crisis of food inside can't be viewed in a vacuum. But as I mentioned before, it mirrors and is separable from food justice issues on the outside. So I want to go ahead and zoom in a little bit on the experience for individuals who are often in prison. So highlight slide, please. And I would like to start off by saying these pictures are not from prisons in Maine. These are pictures from Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Texas, and they are very typical of prison food around the US. And just a few highlights that I want to point out that came from our original report research. When we spoke with people who had been incarcerated, about 94% of our survey respondents told us that they had been starving in prison, that they didn't have enough food to feel full, either because the portions were insufficient or because the food was simply too bad to eat. People described it as it's just enough to keep you alive. People told us that, they're so desperate for food, they're eating out of the garbage. We heard about people in solitary confinement who were eating toothpaste and toilet paper just to try and fill their stomachs. 3/4 of our survey respondents told us they had been served food that was spoiled or rotten during their incarceration. And again, this is from across the country, from across the US. We heard about people finding cockroaches or pieces of metal in oatmeal. We heard about moldy bread, sour milk, rotten meat, and packaged products that were years and years past their expiration date. We heard from people in various states around the country who had been assigned to work in the kitchen that they received boxes of food marked not for human consumption. And one person told us that they thought the food there was designed to slowly break your body and mind. And really, as human beings, food sends messages to us. It can send messages of care, or it can send the opposite message. And in most prisons, the food is really designed to send a message that people are not worthy of care or well-being. And the impacts of hearing that message meal after meal, day after day, can really have a profound impact on someone's sense of self-worth. Slide, please, Hyla. So these are just a few of the short and long-term impacts that people shared that they had attributed to food that they ate while they were incarcerated. And some are things that people face after incarceration for a year and some after decades. A lot of prisons don't necessarily have great sanitation practices. People who are incarcerated are 6 times as likely as the general population to suffer from foodborne illness. In terms of nutritional quality, there are no national standards, so each state is left to make its own. This means that prison meals in most states tend to be very high in sodium and sugar, very high in refined carbohydrates, very low in nutrient-dense foods like fruits and vegetables and quality protein. This is because this is an inexpensive diet, even though we know that it's a diet that can lead to poor health and early death. And this can really cause or exacerbate conditions like increased body weight, increased inflammation, blood sugar issues that can lead to chronic illness like diabetes, heart disease, and hypertension. Can also weaken the immune system, leaving people more susceptible to infectious disease, including things like COVID. And it's really not just physical illness. Diet lacking in critical nutrients can also cause long-term mental health issues, everything from depression to impaired decision-making to aggressive behavior. We also now know that the human brain is still in active development until age 26, and many people who are incarcerated ended up in the criminal legal system before that age. So when you think about the impacts of a diet that's insufficient in critical vitamins and minerals on someone whose brain is still developing, that's especially disturbing. And there are many other factors that contribute to a typical prison food experience, including unhealthy food and inequitable access to commissary items, and eating environments that might not be clean or that may be stressful and cause mental distress. I want to keep moving so that we can get to our panel, but there are lots of other parts of this issue that we have information about in the report, or that I'm happy to chat with folks about another time as well. Slide, please, Hyla. One other thing that I do want to mention is that we know that a huge percentage of folks who are incarcerated have experienced trauma in their lives, and that's prior to the inherent trauma of being incarcerated. And there's a growing body of research that delves into the connections between food and trauma. So the body's physiological response to trauma can actually set people up for lifelong chronic health conditions. And this graphic comes from Leah's Pantry, which is a really fantastic organization that focuses on trauma-informed nutrition. They use this metaphor of a house, stating that you can't really build a stable house if the foundation isn't stable. So when people experience trauma or toxic stress, whether or not that's directly related to food, this has physiological impacts on the body. It can damage your metabolism. It can cause inflammation. It can disrupt the gut-brain circuitry that tells you when you're full. And this can have social and emotional and cognitive impacts. It can lead you to crave high fat and high sugar foods. It can lead you into that sort of fight or flight mode. You lose your ability to self-control and self-regulate. And then that leads to coping strategies that might not be healthy. So overeating or reaching for substances. We know that over 80% of people who are incarcerated have struggled with substance use. And then those things, again, lead to other health impacts, diet-related disease, issues with substance use. And so it's really important to note that when we're feeding people unhealthy food in prisons, rather than using, to paraphrase Mark, who always says food can be medicine or it can be poison, in too many prisons around the country, it is poison. And we're not giving people the medicine through food that they need to actually heal and to actually be able to be in a better position when they're coming out of prison. Slide, please, Hyla. Thank you. So what is happening in Maine? Now we get to the pretty pictures. I want to emphasize that in general, departments of correction are not exactly bastions of change or progressive thinking. Many are not really willing to spend time thinking about food beyond meeting any basic requirements for meals on the lowest budget possible. Maine is really an outlier and a leader in this space. It's really the first state with a DOC that's making a genuine effort to connect food in a holistic way to physical health, mental health, job training, to really keep the food as situated in the local food system as possible, and to be really open to working with outside nonprofits and companies who want to do crazy things like put professional chefs into prisons to develop replicable models for good food service. So we got introduced to the Maine DOC about 4 years ago when doing research for the Eating Behind Bars report. I had found this article on one of Maine's garden programs at the Maine State Prison, which was started by now Commissioner Randy Liberty when he was the warden there. And I reached out to him, and he's very open about having grown up with an incarcerated parent in a food insecure household, and really sees food as a means of helping people grow and learn and reflect and become healthier human beings. And I had reached out to him for a chat when doing research, and that was followed up with an invitation to come up to Maine and see what staff was already doing on the ground there, which is how I met Mark and later Krista, and got really connected with folks who are doing amazing work on their own, in addition to what we're doing together collaboratively. So this is a really special DOC where there are some very strong food champions who are doing amazing things in different aspects of food. And I am going to stop talking in a moment and let you hear from those drivers of change in the food system at the Maine DOC. I do want to mention that the food in the Maine DOC is not yet perfect. And one of the reasons that I most appreciate working with our colleagues there is they're constantly recognizing opportunities for continued growth and seizing those chances to change things for the better. It's really, really unusual. I can't emphasize that enough. It's really, really unusual to have people like this in a DOC who are so dedicated and so willing to see food as the central thing. So I am going to stop there. Hyla, you can go ahead and stop the slide share so we can get everyone's faces up. Thank you. So to go ahead and introduce our panel, I'm going to have everyone start off by explaining sort of who you are and how you came to your role in the Maine Department of Corrections food system, and just talk a little bit about what you do and what you've accomplished so far in that role. So we'll start with Krista, and then we'll go to Chris, and then Mark, and then Colin. So Krista, go ahead. And you each have about 5 minutes to go through and do your intro and tell us about your programs and what you've done. So Krista, go ahead.
So good morning. I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is Krista. I am a classically trained chef. All that really means is that I went to culinary school. I've worked the circuit of restaurants for most of my adult life. When I was first hired 11 years ago with the Maine Department of Corrections, I was hired on as a culinary art instructor. I had the pleasure of working with the women at the pre-release center when it was in Alfred. For the first 5 years I was with the department. What I quickly learned, I didn't really know what I signed on for when I first joined the department. I had visions of classical cookery and mother sauces and things like that. What I quickly learned was food that was sort of coming in satellite fed through another facility was not super pleasing to the women that resided there. So it made sense for me just to kind of be able to run the kitchen like a restaurant and go back to all of the things that I had been doing for years and years and years. And it was just kind of an extension of the program that I had wanted to run with them. And it afforded me the opportunity to bring that scratch-based cooking and the freshest ingredients available to all of the population. It was a huge success. Once we started to go from there and we started to do things like catering, and it just really took off without a hitch. It was a really sought after program. A lot of the residents wanted to be in the kitchen and put the extra time and effort into learning how to bring that scratch-based cooking to our everyday food prep. And as we went along, about 5 years in, we moved on to the Maine Correctional Center campus. And there's a lot more land on that campus. And I first kind of started meddling into the garden up there. I should also add that I only had access to Cisco. So a lot of bag salads, canned food, stuff like that. And so what I kind of found out when I was on the Maine Correctional Center campus was there was a lot more access to land and farmland and fresh foods. For whatever reason, the gardener had left, and I started meddling into the garden because I had the ability to do classes and things like that too. The first patch that I found out about was the rhubarb patch. From that patch, we harvested 125 pounds of it. We processed it, we cleaned it, we prepared it, and we ate really well with all things rhubarb. We went into the main garden that season and we rescued another between 7,000 and 9,000 pounds of food that we were also able to incorporate into the menu. From there, I had a chat with the warden, Scott Landry, who was the warden at the time, and asked me if I wanted to take the garden on. I'm not much of a green thumb myself, but at that time, I had worked with Mark McBride for a number of years, who was the food service manager up at Mountain View, Charleston, and down east. And I knew that he had an extensive background. So I said, I will agree to kind of help with it under the guise that Mark agrees to be my mentor. And he graciously accepted. And from that relationship and that mentorship, we were able to grow like 23,000 pounds. And this is all stuff that was incorporated into not only the female menu, but we were able to share it with the whole campus, so the men included. And it's just been amazing from there. So we've just really, I mean, I will always embrace scratch-based cooking and as close to zero food waste as possible. But the fact that I can access beautiful organic produce from the garden right in our backyard as well is just amazing to me. I now have the ability, the director, so I get to kind of work with all of the facilities everywhere and continue to help support that mission and grow our farms and grow our kitchens and help things like the apprenticeship programs and help bring the farmers together and the food service folks and just see how far we can take it. But that's just a little bit about what I do here. So thank you for having me. I don't know if you want to go, Chris?
Sure. Thank you, Krista.
Sure.
So my name is Chris and good morning to everyone. I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the garden and agricultural programs here at MSP. I've been incarcerated for the past 18 years, and so I've been able to witness a long history of evolution at this facility. When I first arrived, there was already an existing greenhouse here on the grounds. We had a lot of flower beds, but there were no vegetable gardens as of yet. And about 2015 or 2018, they started doing the Master Gardener program and started breaking ground. And to date, we have 23 different plots of land, and we're farming vegetables on about 1.5 acres. Our best harvest year was in 2021, I believe, when we harvested about 27,000 pounds. And what we do with that is 80% goes to the kitchen to enhance the menu for the population, and the other 20% gets donated to the community. So that partnership with the community to be able to give to the local food pantries and soup kitchens is a big motivating force for what we're doing here. The pay isn't very great, so but that, money isn't always the biggest motivating factor for doing this work. So when we can encourage each other and remind each other that what we're doing is bigger than us and what we do, and that we're able to touch people out beyond the walls from in here, it's a big sense of pride for doing this work. I started taking the Master Gardener course in 2019. It was definitely something that I was excited about doing. And as we know, 2019, 2020, that's when COVID started to take off. And so right in the middle of the Master Gardener course, everything got shut down. And we started experiencing our first quarantine. And then it was early in 2020, they started slowly opening up again. And then my first experience with volunteering was in about May of 2020. We were still during the height of COVID. We're out in the gardens wearing masks, and it was preferable to being inside locked down. That was basically the only option to get out of the room, but I still knew that it was definitely a permanent change that I wanted to make for myself in my life, to just be able to connect with the earth. And it's just very liberating and very freeing, and you don't even feel like you're in prison when you're out there digging in the dirt. VTI Mindy is definitely an incredible mentor, and she has just done incredible things with getting the Master Gardener program, the greenhouse, beekeeping, vermiculture, just so many things that all tie together, and we learn how everything is connected here. And the bees pollinate the flowers that produce the the fruits and the vegetables that we get to enjoy. And she's definitely empowered us to take ownership of the program. And so in my time, my 4 years, I'm on my fourth year now. I've made it up to the position of foreman, and the crew looks to me for direction, and I do my best to coordinate all of the daily tasks that are involved. And it's a lot. We do a lot. And we're still expanding. We have a lot of diverse crops that we grow. There's always something that we're learning. Where our community partners are huge. Essential role. Mark McBride, he hooks us up with the fish emulsion, and there's just so many people to thank with what we're able to do. Just yesterday, we sent out our load of flowers that we do every year. We create about 1,000 plants in 2-inch pots, and then we take and we set aside half to go to a local elementary school. And the other half we put out front for staff and people's visitors coming in on Mother's Day. And whatever isn't taken, we add that to the elementary run. And that got sent out yesterday, and they were just incredibly grateful. This first grade class at an elementary school. So, it's just, we work 5 months. We work 5 months for the year for that event, and it's just a super thing that we take pride in.
Great.
But I guess I should probably leave it there. I could continue talking for a long time, but I'm grateful for this opportunity and glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris and Krista. And we'll obviously come back to you in a moment and, definitely want to hear more about what you're doing and why you do it. So yeah, thank you so much. That's a really great introduction. I think, and I just do want to mention, Chris just mentioned VTI Rebecca Mendy. She runs the garden program. She's the staff person who runs the garden program there. She couldn't be with us today because she is on a much deserved vacation, but I hope that folks will have a chance to meet her at some other time because she is very deeply involved in food systems work and is a really big advocate for food and gardening inside of prisons. So let's go over to Mark.
Good morning. My name is Mark McBride. I'm the food service manager, as been mentioned, at Mountain View Correctional Facility in Charleston, Maine, and the Down East Correctional Facility in Machiasport. Got into corrections 13 years ago. Was an organic farmer working with our family, doing 5 farmers markets, several CSAs. We had 500 senior farm shares with the state that we did out, and it was definitely a full-time and a half job. My dad ended up with cancer and needed to kind of just have a more set schedule than 24 hours a day on the farm. So ended up having a background. I had worked as a food service manager for hospitality services in Bangor, overseeing a restaurant and 5 banquet facilities, and ended up had been involved in food for a lot of my life. Also, both my grandparents were farmers. Both of my grandmothers were educators. All of my siblings either teach or are school administrators, or their wife or both are school administrators. I was the only one that was crazy enough to take the farming part on, and it was a passion of mine ever since I was young. I spent just all my time day after I got out of school till the day it was time to go back in the fall. I was at one of my grandfather's farms, and I wouldn't have gone back then if my parents weren't the school superintendent and teacher, so I would have gotten in trouble. But I really am thankful for that. But that's what kind of led me to the point that when I needed to get something that was better schedule, I ended up going to the correctional facility. One of the people that worked for me for hospitality services had gone there 14 years earlier, had left working for me. And he said, if you came up, I think if you were here for a year or so, got a job as a guard, you could get into the kitchen. And that kind of was history. About a year or so after being there, I became a cook and worked my way up to the food service manager. That was 2016, I believe, when that change took place. And through a bunch of events, I really wanted to do something that would be able to use my agricultural background. I was working in the kitchen, but when I became food service manager, I said, we need to really make some changes. Went to a whole foods approach instead of processed, started scratch cooking. It was pretty much not found throughout the department at that time. And it was something we kind of picked off a little at a time. We started buying all of our potatoes, no more French fries. We ended up getting local eggs. We got all kinds of different vegetables that were offered by farmers in the area. And then worked to start an agricultural program We started with little raised beds. We had no land. Ended up doing, very well. 4 of those raised beds that we had, we did double plantings of cucumbers and raised 1,600 pounds of cucumbers that year. And once the administration saw that it was something that was really possible to do, something that made a difference, they allowed me to get a hold of the inland fisheries, and we leased property across the road, and it worked from 2 acres now up to 5 acres. And we last year grew 73,000 pounds at our facility. It's not just about growing. That's a really important thing, but being able to incorporate this, there are places around the country that do a lot of gardening programs, but we've specifically tried to make it to where it was going to make a difference on the plates that we were serving. And we've tried to do the best we can to make that happen. We do also, we've many years donated, 20 or more thousand pounds of vegetables to local food pantries. It is important, as Chris had mentioned, a lot of the residents feel that it's a really big thing for them to be able to give back to local communities that they've been involved with. And we now have an apprenticeship program. We had the first graduate that graduated from our program at Mountain View. And actually, he was the first institutional cooking graduate in the state, is now working at a restaurant. And if you watch the film Friday, you'll see the progression of following him through the program and getting out and actually working in a restaurant. 2 of our apprentices are currently working in restaurants right now, and hopefully many more to follow. We also hopefully will find out today. The commissioners asked me to create an apprenticeship program for a regenerative organic market farming and gardening program, and they were going to give us the word today on the approval. We've heard it will pass, but that's going to allow people like Chris, if they so chose, to be in that program. The Department of Labor sets the rate, and it will be an increase for pay for 5 residents at each facility that'll go through this program, and not only get that extra pay, but be able to have a piece of paper from the Department of Labor that's totally separate from corrections that says they went through this apprenticeship program. So that's important when they get out for jobs. And again, like Chris said, I could keep talking, but I'll pass it back to Colin. And thanks for the heads up, Colin. I probably would have missed this because I had it in my mind with everything. I've been traveling to a lot of the facilities, and for some reason I had a 1 o'clock in my mind, and I would have found out, but it would have been last minute. Colin said, I think it's 11, not 1. So appreciate that, Colin.
I got you, Mark. All right. I'm Colin Freeman. I'm the program chef with Brigade. I'm formerly a restaurant chef in Philadelphia for the past 12 years. So I'm working with Brigade, which is a company that's working to improve food in all institutions, whether it's schools, hospitals, senior centers, and now prisons. We've partnered with Impact Justice and the Maine DOC to develop a model for food production and education inside the correctional facility. I came into the role because I followed Brigade on social media for a really long time, and I fell in love with the message, which was to improve food and increase scratch cooking in institutions and to feed as many people as possible, which should be the goal of all chefs, to cook amazing food and feed as many people as you can. So I've only really been in Maine for 3 months now, 2.5 months. So I've been observing the kitchens and all the different facilities, studying the systems that they have for producing and procuring food. And I've had a chance to see a lot and really understand the flow of how the kitchen works. And it's been exciting. It's been a great chance to help improve a lot of lives. Yeah. That's all I really got.
Thanks, Colin, and thanks, Mark. And Colin, thanks also for getting Mark here on time.
Anytime.
Appreciate it. Yeah, so thank you everyone for introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit about how you came to be in your role in the food system here. And to those of you who are listening, you'll hear, these are folks who are farmers and chefs and gardeners and people who are, interested in learning from interacting with food, right? It's a group of people who are food centered first. And I think that's another thing that's very unusual to find when you're talking about food in correctional facilities, are people who really deeply understand the profound impact of food and what food can do and the power that it can have. I think, again, there's also a lot of themes going on about just that the food system, right, is not separate in a correctional facility than it is anywhere else in the community. And so you're hearing about, gardens and local procurement and scratch cooking and really trying to re-engage with the food system. So I'd love to go back around to each of our panelists and just talk a little bit about, why is it that you continue to do what you do? So you've all mentioned that sort of providing this quality food experience to people is very important. But when you're thinking about, about Maine's food system as a whole, when you're thinking about the individual folks that you are working on getting good food to, what is it that sort of keeps you going, that keeps you doing what you do? And we can go in any order.
I can jump in. Hi, it's Krista. I know you can't see me. For me, when I first got involved with the ag piece, I mean, at the end of the day, I always want to get my hands on the freshest product that's available to me, because it's just going to enhance the food that much more. But as I went along, it really was more of a way for me to encompass that much more of the population, right? Because I know that not everyone necessarily wants to be in the kitchen with me, but if they didn't want to be in the kitchen with me, maybe they would have an interest in being in the garden or harvesting or processing. So it was a great opportunity for me just to get as many people as I was working with, as many residents in that facility as possible, so that they would be excited about food, from the planting all the way to eating it. And they would be excited about trying new things that they haven't necessarily tried before, or seeing things prepared differently. And just, I mean, a lot of times, believe it or not, incarcerated folks that are incarcerated, it might not be the most positive vibe in the chow hall. So getting folks excited about that whole process and what's on their tray, and just flipping the conversation to a really, really positive experience and excited about things to come. It's just amazing for me. And I just want to grow more, and I want to cook more cool stuff, and I want to expose, because a lot of times, if we would grow, like we'd try to grow mustard greens or kohlrabi or okra or things that aren't necessarily mainstream, and we would do a little write-up on the whiteboard in the chow hall about, what it was, what some of the benefits of whatever vegetable we were featuring. And then we would just do like a little tasting cup and just encourage everyone to try it. And if they liked it, it would just grow from there. And they would be asking about, how are we going to prepare it next? Or when could they see it next? And the process has just been amazing. Absolutely, we would take requests. Absolutely. It would just be another way to get more folks that we serve involved. So absolutely.
Thanks, Krista. Who wants to hop in next?
I think the reason that, if you've been in the food service industry and you are a caring person who tries to want to please people that are going to be eating your food, and then if you mix that with a farmer who's growing this and wanting to see people have the end result of what you've been able to help produce, the natural progression would be to, if you're in a position to do that, that you would continue that on. And having, I will say that it was helpful to me spending that year and a half as a correctional officer and a juvenile program worker, because the facility where I started at Mountain View at one point was one side of the campus was juvenile and one side was adult pre-release. They had to be separate, of course, but we worked at both places. And having the background of working as the officer in those units with the juveniles, it was even more intense because we were, we were doing everything they were. It was even much more integrated in their daily lives with school and everything else. So you can see the impact that the kitchen had on morale and just their daily lives, and often not much of a change took place. And one thing you learn if you're in corrections is that not much changes a lot of times. And so I just noticed really quick that change was a really big thing. Any, especially if it's a good change, but a change is something that they look forward to. And we have cycle menus, and it's really important, and it's not a bad idea at all. But the idea is a lot of times people felt that those cycle menus confined them to not changing anything, and it really didn't. It was just a preconceived idea. So we were able to make changes, and if it said, that we were having meat sauce and pasta on Mondays, which is the case, 1 week we do lasagna, we do spaghetti, we may do chop suey, we try to mix those up. But I tried to explain to people that it says meat sauce and pasta. That could also mean chicken Alfredo and things like that. So we try to make those changes, and it's gotten to be where people are a lot more likely to look forward to those things because, like I said, not much changes when you're in, and so those type of things make a difference in morale, not only in the residents, but in staff. And we've had some pretty positive feedback, and it's just been a progression. And like Leslie said, we aren't perfect. We try to make changes every day. Some of it's been, pretty monumentous as we went along. It was, not always at first was it always received well throughout the whole system, but more and more as we've gone along, we've made more and more changes. And now for us at Mountain View, it's become habit. So it's all of a sudden now this is the way we've done it. So it's a lot easier to then just progress a little bit at a time and fix some of the things that we need to.
Thanks, Mark. Colin and Chris?
I can jump in here. It's Chris. So similar to what Mark said, I've seen a big shift in the culture around what we're doing in the gardens. And in the beginning, it was definitely like mocked by people walking by while people were literally digging in the dirt with plastic cups. And that was the only tool that they had to try to break ground and begin to till the soil and do the things that needed to be done. And now today we have people who are just ecstatic with excitement for asparagus and strawberries, and to try new things, and to see, and for me to see the excitement on their face, and just the transformation about what they thought was possible inside prison for our menus. It's definitely something that keeps me going to do the work that I do.
Yeah. So from a kitchen standpoint, I feel like the most important part of what we're doing right now is teaching. I've been spending a lot of the time just observing, but while observing, I'm in there, I'm cutting vegetables with the guys, I'm teaching them how to develop flavor, and I'm teaching them a tangible skill that they'll be able to take with them wherever they go. And yeah, like the other day I was making a ratatouille with the guys, and this guy was crushing a Mountain Dew, and I was like, here's something that's going to be just as sweet and delicious for you, and here's how we make it. We're going to make it from scratch, and you're going to be able to do this for the rest of your life. And now you know. Now you've learned, and yeah.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Colin. And Colin, the ratatouille looked really good. The pictures that you sent, it looked really delicious. I wanted some for sure. Yeah, I think I really appreciate you all sharing what keeps you going and why you do what you do, because I definitely want to acknowledge the barriers and the challenges that you all are up against, the restrictions around budget and nutritional guidelines, and lack of certain kinds of equipment and security measures and time frames and all the things that you all have to work within, that you do such an amazing job of adapting to, that are not things that any of you necessarily have control over, but you all sort of roll with the punches and still manage to get good food to people under conditions that are really, really challenging to provide good food. So just wanted to point that out to everyone, because it's not easy. The jobs that these folks have are definitely not easy. I'd love to go ahead and open it up. I'm starting to see some questions come into the chat. So I'd love to open it up for participants to ask questions of our panelists. So it's looking like the first question is from Elena, which is, can you expand on the classes that you said that you teach, Krista? Is post-incarceration included to help understand nutrition and cooking and food access better once they are released?
Sure. So let me just jump back a little bit. So one of the first classes I started teaching when of course, the majority of the classes I taught were all food-based classes. So just basic sauces, roasting, cooking, braising, all that sort of stuff. When we moved on to the MCC campus, the food that we received down in the Women's Center, and one of the things that led me into the garden, we started to get satellite fed from the men on the hill. They're just right pretty much in the backyard. So that freed me up a little bit and made me available to teach Serve Safe, which is a national recognized certification. It is and it's just basically sanitation and best practices within a kitchen for a safe workspace. It was very attractive to a lot of the women that I was working with at that time, because it is a pre-release center. So a lot of them do have the ability to go out on work release. And a lot of the women are also going into food service establishments. So having a certificate like that would often give many of them a little raise, just leaving our doors with that. So that was amazing. We partnered with some of the local county colleges, community colleges, and we started looking at relationships and being able to have an agreement to do like a baking 101, a basic cooking class. And we started to do those classes. They were amazing. They are chocked full of wonderful information. As we've kind of progressed, we've gotten away from those classes for the moment, only because I saw a lot more opportunity in not necessarily doing a class that was specialized in baking. I thought it made more sense to do more of a well-rounded program to give them all aspects of the kitchen, because I thought not only are they leaving already with a felony, but the more things I can arm them with from the kitchen, if they knew all of the spaces within the kitchen as well as the ag piece, they would have that much more to leave with. So now we're sort of focused on, you heard a couple of us talk about this apprenticeship program. We have two programs. We've got one that we've developed that Mark kind of touched on with the Department of Labor, the institutional cooking, which has been amazing. And it touches on a lot of those areas within the kitchen. And we've got another one that's a little bit more specified. And we have in our culinary arts program now with Hospitality Maine. So that's just a little bit more about the classes.
Thanks,
What-
Krista. Oh, sorry,
One
go
of
ahead.
One of the differences too that, Colin mentioned, he finds himself teaching. And I think it's important because when I first started in the kitchens, no matter where you went, pretty much in the state at that point, we as correctional officer cooks or cook supervisors or food service managers, we cooked the meals. And if we had anyone in the kitchen, they would often, they would do dishes, they would help serve or whatever. But a lot of the staff were the ones that cooked most of the meals back 13 years ago. And what's worked on is, and we've tried to promote, because it's worked very well for us, is that we spend our time teaching the residents and then they carry out the tasks. And it's worked out very well because one, they're getting a very good education, and any of them that would want to are in this apprenticeship program. So they're getting something that does it. But a lot of times in the past, a lot of people would say, I can't use all those vegetables because I just don't have time. I don't have enough staff. But what this has helped is by doing what Chris mentioned, what Colin mentioned, where we're spending our time teaching and training so that they can help carry this out. And they've become very passionate about seeing these different vegetables and things come in and be able to create these different meals. Many times they'll come up with recipe ideas on how to use these things. We, as many of you that are involved in food in the last year, lettuce at one point here was, instead of $26 a case, it was up to $92 at one point because of what had taken place. And it really, just put a crunch, and we said, okay, we're not going to be, getting lettuce twice a day. So we tried to do some different things. We had bok choy coming out of the garden. We had all these different things, cabbage. We did different types of coleslaw. The cabbage was able to be stored. But one of the residents came up with the idea that they had seen where there was a salad that you make with bok choy and diced apples and things. And he said, would you mind us trying it? He did the recipe. I said, go ahead, that'd be great. And it was a hit. And now it's something that we will do regularly when we have bok choy. So I just think that it's really important to, realize that sometimes the obstacles we have, like with lack of labor, can be taken care of. And I know there's sensitive, and some people think that, well, okay, you're just using them for work, whatever. But I think if you talk to Chris, no one has to do this. These people apply for these jobs, they want it, and they would rather do something meaningful to put better food on the plates and be able to be learning. And it's just provided us a whole different way of doing things.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Like the guys that I work with, they do it because they want to. It's a passion. It's definitely not for the money. We make, top pay is less than what starting pay is in the kitchen or industries. Like you have to want to be outside. You have to want to improve the culture of the facility, the beauty of the facility, to learn the skills that they can take with them. That's a big thing. That's a big motivating factor for the guys. They want to learn, and I'm happy to try to teach them and see them move on and succeed, with that knowledge. There's guys that have left here and they're working down at Plants Unlimited, raising plants down there, and their experiences here certainly carried over to that for them.
Thanks, everyone. The next question is from Adina, who says, I think of how important diet is in managing diseases like diabetes. Are there conversations like that happening around prison food offerings? Anyone want to take that one?
Could you repeat that, Leslie, please?
Yeah, so Adina is asking if there are conversations around managing diseases like diabetes that are happening around prison food offerings. I can tell you on a national level, there are usually dietitians who are involved with DOCs who try to do some sort of conversation or education. I will say that in many places, people with, for example, diabetes are sort of educated, using that term loosely, to just not eat the items on the tray that are not diabetic friendly, but they're not necessarily provided with an alternative. So it just means that you end up with less food.
Right.
I would love to hear from any of you about how specifically that works in Maine. So if someone, for example, has diabetes, what conversations are had with them around food? I'm guessing that's going to probably be Krista or Mark.
We have a dietitian who has done special diets, and we have a carbohydrate restrictive diet that is based for diabetics that would limit the carbs and give options. And it's very specific. Our therapeutic diets are specific in that the option is placed on this, so we know what to substitute with. It's not, it's not left to the resident to decide, you don't have to eat this. Their diet is specific, and it would have a diet that would meet the needs of a diabetic diet. And we also have, several diets for different types of situation. There are set diets that are called therapeutic diets. We also have religious diets that would meet the religious needs, but these therapeutic diets are all specified out, and our dietitian monitors those. If someone has a special, we have people that are even on renal diets and things that are having dialysis. And so there's lots of different things, but if there's something that is needed and medical sees that there's a person that doesn't meet one of these approved therapeutic diets, the dietitian will then make a special diet and give that to us to follow. So in Maine, we do have therapeutic diets that would meet the different needs, like diabetes.
And I can also touch on that a little bit too. I will say that since we've certainly incorporated and embraced the farm to tray a lot more, over the years, I've definitely had some of the women in the facility that I used to work in that were going through breast cancer treatments and things of the like, and they were so thankful and so grateful to have that fresh produce on their trays. And they were almost like, what are we going to do when the winter comes along? Because they felt the change just in having the fresh items added to their tray. And a lot of the women would almost make fun of me a little bit because I'm one that will sneak vegetables into a lot of the food that was being served. But they came to love it, and they would look forward to it, and they would request things again and again, because I think it's really important. Food is a language that everyone speaks, and it's something that certainly will tie people together. And a lot of people have various memories about dishes that were prepared from an early age. And just when you can get people that are going through some sort of medical event or have started working in the garden or the kitchen and get them to relate on that level about certain things that they like or they want to see, the process has just been amazing. So I hope that helps.
Thanks, Mark and Krista. And I'm trying to keep up with the questions in the chat. Hyla, let me know if I'm missing any, okay? The next question is from Vina. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Can any panelists speak to commissary foods and whether there are efforts across MDOC facilities to improve those offerings? I'm going to throw that one to Chris. And Chris, are you comfortable talking about commissary and what's happening with the annex and the garden stuff in MSP?
Yeah, so immediately sticks out in my mind that we've got a proposal in, and I think we're making headway where we've been talking about wanting to make the vegetables directly accessible through the canteen annex for the population, so that residents would possibly be able to go in, and even if they don't have any money on their books, they would have like a credits. So they'd be determined, okay, if you're indigent, there would be a fund set up through the inmate benefit fund set aside, and you go in and you'd be able to purchase, a set amount of worth of vegetables through the annex every month, probably, or every week. I don't know how they have it specifically set up, but it sounds like a great idea, and it sounds like it's people are receptive to the idea that, you know, we would be able to get fresh produce in lieu, you know, instead of just ice cream and candy bars, and, you know, just trying to encourage people to eat healthier and making that available. But at least, you know, we're seeing it reflected, you know, in the regular meals that are served to the population. Everybody looks forward every year to seeing the tomatoes and the cherry tomatoes from the gardens making its way into the salad, the cabbage making its way into the coleslaw. You know, we do a lot of different produce, eggplant, peppers, carrots, and definitely we see it reflected in the meals. But still, unfortunately, you know, the regular commissary it's largely carbohydrates and sugars and fats processed, and, you know, it's unfortunate, and, you know, we're doing our best to push back against that, to improve everyone's, you know, state of health. And as Leslie eloquently described earlier, you know, there are long-term, you know, health consequences that we see every day. There's probably an increased rate of diabetes in incarceration. It's unfortunate.
I think that this goes along with what Leslie said. We don't claim to be perfect in Maine, and I think it's one of our weakest points. It's very, very often discouraging and disappointing when you put the much time as we do into therapeutic diets. At Mountain View, we have what's called ALU, with assisted living units. So we basically have a nursing home for residents that have had, you know, many of them been in for most of their life. And so the amount of diets that we do for that are, you know, quite sizable. And when some of the commissary items and the new system that was put in, the first day it came, within 2 hours, the assisted living unit bought all the Mountain Dew that there was in the machine. And that just kind of goes contrary to the fact of what we work so hard to do for meals. And I know, as far as the administration, one of the things with the new Maine model of corrections is that, you know, we're going to create normal and do normalization. And so that means that normally most of the people out in the world would be able to get these items, and these guys want these items, so we've got to provide them for them. But I just think it's almost, in some ways, this has gone backwards, and I really hope that we can work towards what Chris had mentioned, to where we can give some options, and at least, you know, maybe if they became popular enough, it might catch on and some people might make some choices that are better.
I actually had a conversation the other day with the culinary education chef at Mountain View, Mark Spars, about combining the culinary education into kind of like a cafe restaurant situation. So we're giving less processed food while also giving them real life experience, like restaurant style experience to take with them.
Colin, I've been wishing somewhere would do that for years. So could you please get that?
I'm very excited about the idea.
No, that's great. And I think all the things that you all just brought up are really important when it comes to commissary. And the proposal that Chris was talking about at Maine State Prison was actually brought to the attention of the administration it was an idea that came from one of the residents, from someone who works on the garden crew. That right, Chris?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so, you know, I think it's just important to know that people, and this is something that we've heard when we're talking to people across the country, is just that there is a desire to have access and to have options for fresh and healthy food in commissary, and it's just not something that we see anywhere. So it is really cool to hear about the things that are happening there to try and get that bit off the ground. Next question, Hyla, I think I just lost my place in the questions. Where are we with the question?
No worries. G had a question. Actually, it's a two-part question asking whether there's any support provided or could be provided to support families of incarcerated people to increase food security. There's also another question asking about what entities currently exist to support people who are reentering society and whether these entities can help provide support to people to enroll in programs like Senior Farm Share.
Thanks, Hyla. That's a great question. Do any of the folks on the panel know about what entities support folks after they release to help with food assistance? And I realize that might not actually be something that anyone here can answer, but if there's anyone who can or anyone else in the room who can.
As far as support for after folks are released with food insecurities and things like that, Mark, do you want to just kind of touch on the whole donation process for us with products that we're harvesting from our farms and kind of what that looks like?
Well, we donate to food pantries and food cupboards, but as far as help for actual residents working, one of the hard things, and I know when Leslie was right when she mentioned, you have to realize sometimes we have limitations and things that are put on us, and even if we wanted to do more, sometimes even the laws that are in place make it very difficult. We have right now the restriction that if, say, Chris got out and he left today and he left, we cannot have contact with him for 1 year after he leaves. And you can understand that there's good reasons of that, because you don't want people that are working in the prison, there might be correctional officers or healthcare or whatever, and saying, we're gonna, you get out. And anyway, there could be bad things that could take place, but it also makes it hard when you really want to see people do well and you really can't even check on them. It's just like Tim, that's going to be in the film. He called me, I don't know, about a month ago, and it had been a year so he could do that. But I wouldn't even have answered the phone or talked to him, because I would have been in violation of something that I shouldn't be doing. But it would have been great to know how he was doing. But so it's hard for us, because when they do leave, we can do everything we can to get them set. We can even get job interviews for them before they leave, which we've done, like in Tim's case and in the other apprentice that's working. We got them interviews while they're inside working, and they had jobs ready for them when they get out. But on the outside, it almost has to be different organizations that would take it from there, because we're just limited in corrections.
And we try to have different volunteer organizations come into the majority, if not all of our facilities, to kind of bridge those gaps and just help to give residents support. But Mark's absolutely right. It is usually at least a year that we can even check in with people. So we try to get as many volunteers as possible. Obviously, during the pandemic, it made it really, really challenging. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. And in about 5 minutes, when we wrap up the panel, we're going to put up a Jamboard and have folks put up suggestions for things that people in the community can do, or areas where there could be ways of supporting people. So if you have ideas related to some of these, like policies or programs or organizations, please put them up on the Jamboard when the time comes, because again, there are hurdles, or there are things that the folks who are working on the ground in the DOC don't necessarily have control over, that, to really root this back into community, would be great to see more connections with community organizations and community folks who can help with this. Last question before we shift gears I'm seeing is from Anna. And Anna, I can't tell you how much I love this question. Anna's writing, our work at Full Plates is focused on increasing access to school meal programs across Maine. We know a big part of that is what is served on the tray. There are great efforts all over Maine to increase local food and scratch cooking in school kitchens, but so many barriers that school nutrition professionals face: funding, equipment, limited staff. One of the biggest hurdles we see is the mindset around school meal programs, that they are undervalued and have a deep-seated negative perception that shows up in every cartoon and comic book. Do you have advice on how to shift that culture and mindset around school food based on your experience shifting that mindset around prison food? The reason I love this question so much, Anna, is because Flip That was basically where we were a few years ago when we were doing the Eating Behind Bars research, asking all the people who were working in school food transformation, how can we take the lessons that you're learning from school food mindset shifting and use that to shift mindsets around prison food? So to have someone flip that question and ask that as like, what's the lesson learned from trying to shift mindsets around prison food? I feel like we have just somehow reached some sort of like important milestone in working on this. So thank you. That question just made my day. But I'll ask the folks on the panel to go for that first. Do you have advice on how to shift a culture or mindset around school food based on your experience shifting that mindset around prison food? It's such an interesting way to flip that question.
I think the biggest thing is that if you have an interest and a passion, the most important thing you can do is, in your space where you are, do everything you can to make those changes and model what needs to be done and work hard, and hopefully eventually, I know I wish I had an easier answer, but hopefully you can get enough attention for what you're doing that someone else out there, I can tell you, is probably going to say, boy, that's what I've tried to do. And we've had many people that have reached out and said, we wanted to do these things. What do you do? Sometimes we've been on calls with Farmstead Institution, New England, and one of the states said, yeah, probably the only reason you can do that is because it was all set up and going when you got there. And that's not the case. I mean, we started from nothing. So you just have to be patient, and you have to, it's like anything. It's hard sometimes to make these changes, and you just have to be patient, and you have to do everything you can. And hopefully as it goes along, it is catching. I mean, my staff now is 100%. Everyone, this is just the way they do things. And our residents, you can see the passion that Chris has and many of the others that are our facility. Once that happens, the next person that comes in and gets trained and mentored by someone like Chris, that passion is going to make a difference in them. And after a while, it just becomes the way that you do things. But I don't think there's an easy bullet that's just going to make it to where next week you can start a program like this.
Thanks, Mark. Anyone else want to weigh in real quick? And Regina, I'm seeing your comment about it's a generational thing, right? Yeah, Chris or Krista, I saw you just came off mute.
Well, also, I think if you get enough like-minded people together, I know there's enough of us now with the department, and we're so like-minded, and we can see the results, and we can see the importance and the value of what we do every day. And the fact that we can come together and discuss, what's working for us and what's not working for us has been a huge key to our success. I would love to see it also show up in schools more. I know that in Maine anyway, it seems like a lot of the local farmers and things are trying to make those connections. And I think through forums and things like this, the more people that we can get talking, the better chance that we'll have to succeed. I'm happy to partner with anyone else out on the school sector or anything like that.
We're doing a lot on our end to document our practices and our models, and trying to generate reports on the steps that we're taking to do a lot of things with the gardening aspect. I know that's not quite the, serving them, the culinary end. But anything we can do to create a model that can, be shared with other states, prisons across the nation, to have the gardening aspect. in tandem, we're looking to share.
Yeah, I think those are really great points about, change taking time and about that sort of snowball effect of finding other like-minded people and making a lot of noise together. I think that then, yeah, and Regina saying if a prison environment can shift, then schools certainly can. Definitely agree with that. Yeah, so we are about to put a Jamboard link into the chat. So go ahead and join. If you've never used a Jamboard before, there is a little space on the left-hand side, 4 icons down that says sticky note. And if you click on it, you can type onto a sticky note and have it go up onto the board. So the question is really, how can we support our neighbors who are impacted by incarceration? I have 3 sort of basic buckets up here: policy, programs, and then production or procurement. Depending on, where your ideas might fall. If there are other buckets that you can think of, feel free to throw them in there. But this really is a community issue of supporting folks in their nourishment while they are incarcerated, or when they're coming home from incarceration, or as G mentioned before, the families of people who are incarcerated. So if you have ideas based on what you're doing, go ahead and start throwing those up onto the Jamboard, and we will try and follow up with folks after this. If you'd like us to follow up individually about an idea, please put some sort of identifying contact information or something on there, and we can give you information to follow up with us afterwards as well too, if you'd like to talk about this more. And I did also want to mention, G, I saw your comment in the chat about what is the percentage of incarcerated people who are food insecure before becoming is not to celebrate incarceration, but just to point this out. That's a really valid point. I think we as sites of food apartheid and as sites of food insecurity, but in some cases there are people who were in situations on the outside where being incarcerated is the first time that they have had stable access to food. And if we're talking about somewhere like some of the places in Maine, access to food that it might actually be nourishing. I would love to know that statistic. I don't think that statistic exists yet. Oh, really? Thanks, Jay. Okay, great. Glad to have that quoted back to me. But yeah, I'm seeing people are in the Jamboard. I'm not necessarily seeing anything go up yet. So, oh, there we go. Folks are starting to put stuff up. So yeah, and if people want to share out loud as well, that would be great, and just sort of have a bit of a conversation. We've got about 10 minutes left. It would be great if folks want to, if you've posted something and want to come off mute and share, please feel free. Don't all jump at once. And this is also open, obviously, to folks on the panel as well. So please feel free to speak up if you have ideas too, especially those of you who are working in this space, or, Chris, I know you probably know best what, your peers are saying that they need or would want to see. So, feel free to come off mute and share as well.
Chris had to step out just for a moment, but he will hopefully rejoin us momentarily.
Great, thanks. Let's see. Kyla, do you want to share some of the things that are coming up on the Jamboard?
Sure. So under policy, we have advocating to do away with laws that prevent previously incarcerated individuals from accessing food assistance. It's a great one that we see. We also have policies that support a requirement for social and food services post-incarceration and for families and incarcerated members. We have prison abolition as being another policy measure. Let's Under programs, you have programs that support incarcerated individuals and their families with nutrition classes after they are back in the communities where they live. We also have changing the narrative all over the place about everyone, including incarcerated folks, that they deserve good quality food that reflects their cultures. Under policy, again, we have required DOC to provide and support residents with application assistance for nutrition programs in a timely manner to ensure benefits upon release. And under production and procurement, increase the prison minimum wage. Excellent.
Thanks, Hyla. These are all great ideas so far. Please keep adding them. And, one thing I do want to call attention to is that I know someone put prison abolition up here, and I think that one of the questions that we get a lot in the Food and Prison Project work that we do is, how do you reconcile working with folks who fall along the spectrum from prison abolitionists to people who are working within departments of correction? And I think, a valid answer to that is that good food is something that, everyone should be able to agree on, right? That everyone should deserve good food. And it's something that, when people's needs are met, communities are safer. And making sure that people have quality access to quality food that is affordable and culturally appropriate and nourishing, not just to your body, but also to your soul, in community. And if people are incarcerated and after incarceration, making sure that everyone has access to that, that is something that we should all be able to agree on across the spectrum, and we should all be able to work together around that issue. Hyla, what else has come up since I started talking again?
We have abolished the 13th Amendment, and someone upvoted put a +1 on a sticky note under change the narrative all over the place about everyone. And then we have a new postie saying meat cutting, butcher training. I'm thinking that this is under programs.
Oh, meat cutting and butcher training. That's all you, Colin. Great. These are great. Go ahead and keep posting onto the Jamboard if you've got other ideas or things that are coming up. I do want to go back around to our panelists one more time and ask folks just to respond to the question of what is one thing that you would love to have the opportunity to do around food, but you haven't had the chance to do yet for whatever reason, because of time, because of budget, because of staff capacity or facility capacity. What's one thing that you would love to do but haven't had the time to do yet, or the chance to do yet? Mark, do you want to start us off?
How about Krista go?
Okay, Chris, go ahead.
I'm struggling to answer because the department has always really given me a lot of creative freedom over the years. I've certainly come up with my fair share of madcap opportunities that I thought that they would never let me do. But I always try to obviously have the residents in mind and always just be really mindful of what would move them forward and what would be the most useful tools for them to have when they left. I will say that during the pandemic, one of the things that was kind of really kept us going, at least in the women's building, was we had a couch to 5K, and we really kind of held the farm to tray movement at the forefront of it. It was a chance for us all to get together and be outside and move, whether we're walking or running, and talk about all the things we wanted to grow and the feast that we wanted to make at the end. I would love to see more opportunities like that for folks to be able to come together and be active, and not necessarily in a couch to 5K things, but even just growing our ag programs to get more people involved in our gardens, working with their hands in the soil, and just helping to bridge the gap, and involve the community more. I guess one of the other things that's always kind of on my bucket list is traditionally there's been waste. My program, we've always tried to be as zero waste as possible. So I would love to just be able to connect with more folks out in the community and see how we can continue on that mission to have zero waste. And if there is waste, like what are some more productive things that we can do with getting leftover foods and harvest to folks that are in need? So I guess that would be mine. Long answer, sorry.
Thanks, Krista. And did Chris come back in yet or no?
He is not yet.
Okay. Okay. So Colin or Mark, what's one thing that you haven't had the opportunity to do yet that you'd love to do?
Well, ever since we started on this journey, I've made it a desire, and everyone that's been in any meetings with me knows that this is always comes up. They're like, oh no, not again. But I think the biggest hindering factor that we have, and it's actually probably the biggest hindering factor for all of Maine, is that the lack of processing that we have to be able to take the vegetables that we have and put them in a more readily usable fashion. Many kitchens, rightfully so, are not going to have the passion that I do and that my staff and residents do to take care of the things. We do a tremendous amount of processing to be able to use the amount of things that we do, but we're very limited because of Department of Health and Human Services and some of the restrictions on being able to process without a plant that's actually HACCP approved and certified and all the things that you have to do. Some people might think it's easier than it is, because to actually do what needs to be done to vacuum pack and do these things and have it take place, you really have to have something set aside with all the testing of listeria and all the different things that take place. And so I've really promoted for a long time a processing plant, and it looks like we've actually located a piece of property, and we're working with the engineers, and it's something that it looks like it's going to take place. But if we could get that processing place, then things that Krista mentioned and others have mentioned about wintertime and hard things, we could have some of these good vegetables that we've actually put away to be able to use and even donate to food pantries and places so that we'd have it year round. And I just think if we could do that, that would kind of be the final step for us, that we would be able to really bring things into play that we could make the most benefit to meals year round.
That's great, Mark. Thank you. Colin, you have 30 seconds. What's your
30 seconds.
Yeah. What's a fun time?
I really want to continue to support the residents creatively and helping them express themselves in the kitchen and get a chance to be a part of a system that they're a part of every day. Get their input in there. And I really want to continue to push the scratch cooking, take it even further than where we are right now. Maine's done an amazing job so far, and I think we could do more. And I'm ready to help guide and assist in any ways I can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. That was great. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the attendees of the session for being here and for caring enough to come and hear from the folks who are working on the ground and the folks who are living in the facilities in Maine. Thank you for just, caring enough to understand that this really is a community issue. And huge thank you to Krista and Chris and Mark and Colin for being here to talk about their work today. And I hope that you all enjoy the rest of the food convergence today. I am not able to attend the next bit of the wrap-up session because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm actually at an in-person conference right now trying to get prison food on another agenda about food waste. But if folks are able to go to that next session and talk about what happened in this session and some of the discussions that we had and the things that came up, then that would obviously be much appreciated. And feel free to reach out anytime to those of us at Impact Justice Food and Prison Project or at the Maine DOC, because we all are always happy to talk about food. So thank you all so much. Take care, everyone.